How's it going, everyone? Welcome, Eulero Gonzalez here, and today let's going to now look at the React hooks, especially as a way to understand now how can we walk through this, and by recapping some of the interesting stuff about this course taught by, let me show you. Sorry. Taught by Brian Holtz, right? A software engineer that has previously worked at Reddit, Netflix, Cloudflare, Snowflake, and he's currently the staff product manager at Neon, right? So the idea of today's video is to look now at the React ecosystem, the React hook, the React ecosystem, and the advanced techniques so we can wrap this up by tomorrow. Why is that? Because then I want to now build a particular application in React Native. Again, this is something that will go beyond this topic, but let's get into this. I want to make a quick recap here because this particular course is something that is very, very enlightening, especially the experience that Brian Hall bring to this course, and it also gives you now a little bit of history or a little bit of context, history for context, and I find that out valuable. And I know that a lot of people, that if you're especially starting out, you don't definitely want history. And I get it, it is up to you, but what we can do is to at least show you is what are the things that we can do with this, right? In this particular intro, it doesn't focus about in any of the history and none of that matter, just a thin layer of that as a way to give and provide some context to this. I will recommend seriously that you go out there and try to understand how do we get here, because a lot of the time the tool that we resent is because we don't understand what is the problem that they're solving, or it solves. So when that happens, a lot of the time we have this natural pushback of knowing, of doesn't want to learn this particular code or have this kind of resistance. But again, once you understand what the problem this tool solves, you will embrace complexity. And this particular course is laid out in a way that you can build any application in React and understand why we use React. Because unlike, for example, building applications, you know what is good? You know what is a good place to write a web app? PHP. Yeah. Because now they have this page model, all right? And I want to know a little bit more about it because I am quite familiar with the MVC, which is the way of how can we now develop applications, the model, the view, and the controller, where the model talk to the database, fetch that data, and then now through the view we can populate that to show that to the users, and with the controller decide who can get access to. So I want to ask this: it is safe to say that the MVC model is where the model talks to the database, the view populate the content based on the model, and the controller decide who can get access and other policies as well. That's not entirely accurate. Okay. So the model does indeed handle data and often communicate with database, but the controller role is in primarily about access control policy. Let me break down this. Okay. Act as an intermediary between the model and the unit view. It processes user inputs. Okay. It processes user inputs, manipulate the model accordingly, and determine which view to render. Okay. So the controller handles the application flow and coordinates interaction. Okay. Authentication, authorization, and policy informants are usually implemented as a separate cross-cutting concerns or middleware, although controllers often invoke this service. Okay. So, in other words, a model talks to the database. The controllers process user inputs and data accordingly. Yeah. So the controller process user inputs and the data. The controller process user inputs and data accordingly. To determine which view renders, and the view show the content to the user. So that's what it is, this model controller view. All right. So okay, that makes sense. So the model talks to the database, and then the controller process user inputs and data from the model accordingly to be shown in the view, and then the view render and show that to the user. This is the MVC model. But there is also, so what's the difference? So what is the page model from PHP? You know? So the page model isn't in a standard architecture like MVC pattern, but it can explain two common interpretations of what might be called a page model in PHP developer. PHP page controller pattern. This is where PHP page act as its own controller. Each physical PHP file handles processing requests, interacting with model databases, and rendering output for a specific page or action. This was common in early PHP application where you might have files like user profiles, edit user, where you have now the in some PHP framework or application, developers create model class that corresponds to a specific page. This is the model class, this is the data, okay, that correspond to a specific page rather than data entities. These page models contains the business logic and data access needed for rendering a particular page. If you're referring to a specific PHP framework implementation of a page model, you could let me know which framework. But the thing here, okay. So the PHP page controller, or the page model. So the page model from PHP is a controller that handle that handle incoming requests interact with the models or the database and render an output for a specific page. It is a simpler pattern than full MVC, but can become harder to maintain in large applications, which is why many modern PHP frameworks implement more MVC or similar architectural patterns. But again, this is interesting because now here you have everything here. And it's interesting because actually, well, again, this is Claude generating a lot of this jargon stuff. It says that it can become harder to maintain. And there's also a couple of stuff here in terms of the introduction, because after all, we're going to jump into React hooks and then React ecosystem. I just want to make a quick recap of this. The idea of using React is because there is a flavor called a hack from PHP where it was compelling for a lot of developers, for example, writing PHP websites where you have now the page model, but inside of that you have now can you show me an example of page model? Can you show me an example of the page model? So it's a, hey, I'm gonna handle incoming requests, check if the user is logic for basic authentication, and handling is now controller logic, business logic. If it's login, redirect to that. All right. If it's not login, exactly. If it is, interact with the database here. Then fetch the data from here. As you can see here, we're now having is the model logic. All right. We are now talking to the database. All right, and then we're gonna render the output. This will be the view in the MVC pattern. So by using this particular markdown, when you say, hey, this is now PHP, all right, where we dynamically want to add this data to this, it makes much more. It makes compelling. It makes compelling for PHP developers when you have now the page model, what you're going to define is how you're going to handle the request. How you're going to handle the requests, the user inputs, the model, you're going to talk to the model, and then you render an output to that. That makes a lot of sense. All right. So React developers or people that use React find out that was very, very compelling to go with, all right, since you can now add interactivity to this particular application at this level, right? Because working with the JavaScript here might not be quite easy to do, right? You can add on the screen, and then you have all of these different event handlers and the JavaScript logic as well, So that's the reason why they see compelling to go with React, all right, to use it. So we went through looking at how can we use React with our build tools by just going through through their specific CDN, okay. Also, you can do that with Vue as well, which is something that I really love about that. So with Vue and React, so you can import the React developer surface as well as the render methods, which is the React DOM, the render library. And then you're starting to see now how you can compose all of this. Also the tooling, especially if you want to build or as you hit more complexity in your application, you will need to find a way to make it much more easy to work with, the tooling. such as the prettier to show, so you can show as with prettier for code formatting, the ESLint, for fix common JavaScript issues or ECMAScript issues, for the recommended, which is non-controversial fix in JavaScript, as well as for React. And the other is Git, this distributed version control, so you can now hold the entire state of the application like a snapshot, and from that particular snapshot at a time, you can recreate the entire application. That's pretty cool, bro. That's pretty cool, I must admit. Definitely must admit. And the other is Vite, this model bundler and dev server, as well as build and testing pipeline, right? It integrate a lot of this stuff, and we need to. Why we go through GSX? Because at the end of the day, when you're using React, is doing when you're using plain React, okay, from those CDN, you are creating is the element in it itself. So anytime you want to use React for creating all of this little stamp, okay, this small user interface, you are invoking that JavaScript library with that particular method, create element. So because of that, it'll make sense for us to say, at the end of the day, what we are generating here is HTML, right? So instead of actually creating is JavaScript over and over and over, which can be quite tedious and repetitive, so let's go to now integrate JavaScript in our HTML. So they renamed this as GSX, right? We'll also look at a particular example of how can we work with that, with conditions and render, a list of elements, and understanding why React needs the key value as a way to keep track that all of the elements is going to be rendered and needs show them in the proper order, right? And how we shouldn't use is the index, especially if you want to keep the order on which those elements are rendered. Okay, so you must have a particular ID for that object, all right? And that makes a lot of sense. And some of the React hooks, because at the end of the day, what allows React is to describe all of these stamps ready to be printed when we call them as functions. So to actually provide some of this interactivity, we rely on these particular hooks, which behind the scenes are using Closure. So hooks are using Closure. Yes. So the entire React, so I will argue, and that makes a lot of sense, because now the Closure would allow is to hold the entire state of your application, like you have a token. It's like you have a token of your application that anytime you want to call it, you can look at what this token holds, right? Or another the concept of Closure is that closing over is a function that is closing over variables, where you can now have access even after the execution was run somewhere elsewhere. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because at the end of the day, React is using, so the React library is heavily relying on all of the JavaScript features, such as closure, one of them, functions, uh, functions, functions declaration, so such as scope, chaining scope. Okay, so function is relying on JavaScript features such as function. I can call the synchronous and then the asynchronous. All the JavaScript features, like block or global. So global and function execution, global and function context execution. It's one feature. Function scope, block scope, function scope, block, exactly. Function and block scope. Okay, like global function context execution, function and block scope. Yeah, function and block scope. Reserve space in memory with let, cons, and var. Okay. Type cohesion. Exactly. Type cohesion. Hoisting. Okay. Type cohesion, hoisting. Closures. Function definition and expression. Closures. And this is just to summarize everything from the synchronous aspect. And then now the asynchronous nature, all right, which is promise. You say thunk promises promises, so callback, promises, and generators. So far. Exactly. Additional React take advantage of the object spreading and destruction. Okay, as well as that functional programming concept, GSX, and event delegation, React synthetic event system. So this is all of the things that now at least we can recap of what are the features that React is using behind the scenes. All right. So anytime that you create now a hook, behind the scene is creating is a closure. That a closure is this place that allows you to remember variables, and if you want to have access to, you can by invoking that or by exposing is now particularly functions. But the thing of closure is that you can store that in a permanent way as long as you refresh, as long as you don't refresh the entire application, right? But you can store that permanently, and then you let it on access to that data. So this that can be sound very abstract, But at the end of the day, this is what it's all about with these hooks, right? So we look at use states. We look at use ref. Sorry, we look at use state, the use effect, where now effects are a way of how can we now schedule tasks right after the render is done. Okay, so right after the rendering is done, and the other is the custom hooks, as a way to define is a specific logic that you can reuse as you want, right? And this particular logic that you want to reuse, it might be, for example, defining some also hooks inside of that. So for example, a use state and a use effect as a way to fetch data, and then once that is done, now import that inside of your component. Okay. There are also some nuance, especially when you're gonna go and define your components. And I prefer from this moment and on to say export default function and the name of that for debugging purposes. That's the whole reason of why I'm doing this. Because debugging is something that you are going to need, bro. Debugging your application is something that so debugging or improving your debugging skill is something that you are going to need to develop. So this is a very good opinion of why we define this function. I will also define my, or at least my, or I'm going to define this, at least my components, all right? At least my components. So we also look at the custom hooks. What is the reason of defining custom hooks? Most of the times I'm a web coder, right? And that means that I want, so if I have a function that is called one time, I'm not going to create its own model. Absolutely not. 2 times might be a fluke. 3 times, this tells me that the app needs to do some tests. So I need to do some tests on this. So this is the heuristic that I'm going to take from here. We also look at the static mode, right? To understand that you can apply that to your application to tell you this most common, to tell you common gotchas in React, especially for re-rendering your applications or re-rendering your components. So you're gonna capture that. Might be important for you, and it also going to now run your effect twice as a way to check that. So this is the static mode, right? And we also look at the development mode. This, which is something that V by default doesn't ship that, especially if you define that this is a build for production, so it doesn't ship that. It helps you to prevent that. Slack was famously known to ship for their Electron app, their app on to the React with the development build. So yeah, we download tons of data that we definitely don't need to. Yeah, Slack too. Absolutely with Slack. So in any case, so yeah, so this is all of these React hooks, and let's go into now check out the handling user inputs and the card checkout. But I think mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So let's go to now go into this. Handling user. Handling user. Instead of handling user input. So let's go with the go. You got it. So now that we're here, let's go close all of this and open order. And from the order, I think we already wrote this. No? Okay. I didn't. So here we're gonna define is another state here and say, hey, what is the name of this state? Card, right? You can say card and set card. That I want you to define this place I want to store data, and I want you to keep track of that for me via closures. So in other words, it's like pretty much saying, hey, I want to create now a closure, right? So use state, right? That whatever value that I'm going to pass here, let's say val, right? So whatever value that I want to pass here, I want to return, right? It's a function that is going to hold that value, right? So that's going to return here is this, say val, and it's going to return you now an updated function. This updated function is supposed to be something like this, and say, hey, this is the update, right? And this update function will say, hey, you're gonna take now this as a function, all right, where you say, hey, this is val. Yeah, this is a new value here that we're going to receive. Yeah, so we can say is this is a val, right? Say function, so function update, right, with this new val. And here you're gonna say its val will be is the new val, right? And this is what we want to return, right? So anytime you call this update, and anytime you now export this function, okay, because we at some point needs to use that, the update function, all right. So this update function, we're going to take now this new value and then going to assign this as the current value. So here we effectively are creating our own hook That's pretty my bending. Mind bending stuff. Mind bending stuff. So we got this piece of code. You're on the right track. Right? You say, hey, we're implementing a basic hook, but there is a few important adjustment need to make this word like React use state. Here's a more accurate representation of this. Exactly, you define is a state function, use a state. Okay, so use a state with the initial value. All right. So use a state with the initial value, the state you want to keep track. All right. And the current state reference as well. And then anytime you want to update the value, you say, hey, yeah, the new value with the current state, and then I want to re-render the component. And then you can return is now the state and the set state, right? So pretty much like this. So it makes a lot of sense when we need to define, for example, is a hook, right? So in our case, instead of saying something like this, right? And I use a val as a way to say this is the initial value. All right, you can say initial value, right? When you say, hey, this will be now the state, right? That will be initial value. If the initial value exists, fine. If it's not, okay. So if the initial value exists, fine. Take the initial value. If it's not, well, assign some initial value that you might have, right? You can say, hey, which is if you can say some null, right? For example, if it's not, use the initial value. Then you have your update function. What it does is take the new value and update the state properly. All right. So, but because our state is a const, okay, this update or the set state, which was going to call this set state, right? Set state is going to receive that new value, and therefore is going to and therefore it's going to say, hey, it's something like this. Right, let's say this is a very naive implementation of that. Then you have the state, and then you have the set state as it is, right? And after you said that, then you say, so re-render, re-render component, something like this. And then you want to now is return that. And Yeah, it'll be something like this. But at the end of the day, you need to create is a mhm. Priority-based scheduling. Fiverr can prioritize different types of updates, work units. Let me see. Um, mm, mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Anyway, but the point of this, but the point of this is to try to understand what this is all about, right? sometimes referred as the stack reconciliator. It's an internal reconciliation algorithm, essentially the core architecture that powers React since version 16. It is a complete rewrite of React's previous reconciliation algorithm, the diffing algorithm. So the React Fiber is the new architecture of, what is it, revamp architecture of the old reconciliation algorithm called diffing. In React wasn't officially called diffing, but rather than stack reconciliator. It did perform diffing, comparing previews of the current virtual DOM 3 and to determine what changed, but the terms diffing refer to just one part of the reconciliation. Okay. The React Fiber is indeed a complete revamp of the reconciliation architecture, and by reconciliation is the algo that compare previous and current VDOM into exactly they compare previous and VDOMs to determine what change needs to be done, right? So the diffing is just that particular part of the stack reconcilier. Okay. Fiber reconcilier. It still performs diffing, but breaks the word into small unit fibers that can be prioritized. Okay, that can be prioritized, pause, and resume. So the prioritization, pause, and resume, it is in terms of rendering component. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, hey, I have this priority component. I have these components that have higher priority, or that I can pause, or that I can resume. What are some examples of this? Typical typing in a search box with live result. Without Fiber, the typing input might feel laggy because each stroke will trigger a full re-render of the entire filtering list. Exactly. Anytime you do this, if you type to that, it's going to block the main thread. With Fiber, the keystroke updating the input field get higher priority, but the filtering and rendering and result get lower priority. Result, the users see their typing appear instantly, while the filtering results update when the browser has available time. Page navigation with data loading. Image carousel with animations. Concurrent rendering. Okay, React can start rendering a new view, the analytics, in memory without committing into the DOM. If urgent notifications arrive, React can pause the analytics, but a lot of the time, most of this is something that we can find this again to solve this specific problem. So you're gonna say, hey, I want you to now is, okay, handle search. Okay, and then you say, hey, this has low priority, filter the results, potentially an expensive operation. Start transition, then you say, so you are notifying to React, hey, this is now a potentially expensive operations, so have a low priority. All right. So you receive this data, and I say, hey, I want to do this. Is pending, and for example, like this. So while you can receive, okay, that's interesting. Again, very narrow specific example of this. Useful for the results. Start transition. Page navigation with data loading using suspense. So the first was to say, scenario 2, user clicks to navigate to a new section that needs to fetch data and render complex components. Okay, I navigate to a new section that needs to fetch some data and then render complex components. The navigation UI updates like highlights the active tabs get high priority. Exactly, the navigation UI updates like highlighting the active tabs get high priority. The loading indicator get high priority. The actual data fetching and rendering of the complex page content gets lower priority. So the result, the UI remain responsive during the transition. Okay, but during the transition, loading is another component, but wait for that, showing immediate feedback. A page has an animated image carousel at the top and a form with the input fields below. When you use types in the form, those inputs updates get high priority. The carousel animation frames get lower priority while typing occurs. From typing feels responsive even if it temporarily pause or slow the carousel animation. But there are very specific things to go with to use this. You say, I want to navigate to that. Alright? If I navigate to that, by setting the page and the profile and the dashboard, so on and so forth, I want to provide now a suspend, allows the UI to show a fallback while content loads. And the other is a fair value for smoother UI during updates. So if I'm going to update this in a search component, where you have the expensive list, all right? So I say the fair query tells React this value can be updated with lower priority. So I'm going to update this with lower priority. What I can do is this, low priority. Filter the results potentially expensive operations. Start transition. And the other is exactly start transition, but here the using is now defer value here when you want to again, okay, but in any case, we are looking here is just to understand is the React nature and be able to describe it, right? That's the entire reason why we are exploring this. How can we work with this and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, let's get into this. And that is, so we shamefully create is a somewhat state, right? But again, this is the state, and then right below, we want to say on the form, say on submit. This is a synthetic event. That is a thin layer of events that React apply onto the form element, okay? Where we can pass is a function that we receive this event as an input and say, hey, I want to prevent the default behavior of on submit, so I don't want to refresh the page. And then I want to now update the state, right? So the way to update our state is whatever you have in the card, okay, which is at the end of the day is an array. I want to spread all of these elements, to put all of these elements. So I want to take each element on this card array and put them into this new collection, or into this new. I want to take each element from the card and put it into this new bucket, into this new collections right here. And then I want to add now this. All right, that'll be is. I don't know what is the shape of his data. Okay, I don't know what is the shape of his data. That'll be a good question. What is the shape of his data? The server, what is the shape of his data? Get pixel data, so we have now pixel ID, name, category, ingredient as description. So I'm assuming that this is name, category, and ingredients. I mean as description from pixel types, right? So select, okay, pixel promise, pixel size promises, a promise, and then you compose both of them. All right. So once you compose both of them, then you say, all right, now I want to combine this, or to reduce this. To reduce is to combine this data. To reduce is to combine. So the TLDR is that we get name, category, and description, right? So I want to add now, here is the card name. I think it is. Oh, okay. Because this is what we're going to send. Oh, okay. This is the data that we're going to send to via post. Via post. Via post. Via post. Via post. API order. API contact. API order. Here. Okay. So this expect in our body to have a car, where this car, it doesn't tell us what it needs to be have. It doesn't give us the shape of this function. Lovely. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Might not be that. Merge car. Okay. Forgive me, dates God, for I have sinned. Okay. Exactly. And then you try this stuff that up. All right. Async function get pass orders. In any case, this is the but this is what we're going to send. Post API order. That's interesting because we don't know what the shape of this data is going to be. I am like in the dark. Unless I have, for example, unless I have is, how do you call it? Postman or insomnia to know what is the shape that it needs to send over them, but otherwise I am not, I don't know what is the shape of card, for example, right? So, but in any case, we can say is this one, so say pixel, select the pixel and size. Okay, so this is pixel. All right, selected pixel and size, which is pixel size, right? So pixel size, and this is what I'm going to put in the set car, right? And the price. Exactly. So spread the entire car object into this and add one element and add one more to the car. Because this is for we're doing this on submit is for accessibility. We use on submit we use on submit for better accessibility. Right. Okay, so right below here, okay, we're going to show, I think right below the form exactly, is this loading. Okay, loading, right? If the loading exists, I want to, if the loading, so if you're loading, I want to show is now this nice crafted with love and care, run by legal. I love that. Oh my god. Anyway, loading car. I say loading, right? Otherwise, then I want to show now is the card component. The card component, which is something that we haven't created, but we will to do car. Right? So there you got it. So there is no need to pass this. This is a valid GSX expression, and what we need to define is our car component. So it's going to create now a car. Mm, internationalization. The currency. So what we're doing here is to define. That's interesting. So we're using as a internationalization namespace called number format, because here we can pass is so we can use this as a way to provide native browser support for currency format, right? Like ESUN, for example, and the other is to say, hey, pass now an object of the options. So in our case is, hey, the style of this I want to be is the currency, all right, and the currency will be now is the USD, for example, right? So USD. All right, cool, cool. And then I want to store this into a variable called internationalization, right? Const. And then I want to use, this is an opinionated part because I want to define as the export default function card, and I'm doing this because during debugging you can know is the name of the components in the stack trace. Helpful, very useful. So I don't know what we're gonna define here, but all I know is right now we're gonna receive is something called card, all right, and I'm assuming that we're going to render something here, and that is a div, right, that we're going to show is perhaps they have some particular style here. Oh, exactly. It has to be the structure because otherwise you will receive the props. Card and checkout here. So you want to have access to this particular data that is size, all right? Which is okay. Pixel sizes as a collection, all right? former Brian, a former life. So here is creating is a total here, and say, hey, I'm going to create a total here. Say let total equals 0, all right? Okay. So let total is equal 0, and then I'm going to now count all of the elements there. Okay. Inside of the card, that I'm going to count each one of them. So if I want to count each one of them, so I want to combine each one of them, I can use a reducer, right? And then store the total for that, which is by saying is total will be now the card reduce, which say again reduce is just a combination of stuff that initially you're going to pass as the signature, the shape of the function, as the accumulator and the current value, right? And the second argument is the initial value. So in our case, it can be 0, all right? And then, okay, we now, well, iterate through each one of them. So the accumulator that starts at 0, I want to update this value to whatever current value you have here. Okay. Yeah, whatever current value you have here. Dot pizza. So whatever current value you have here, okay, and I want to have access to that. I want to have access to the size that is an object, okay, that the current value dot size contains now is the size of this. So what is the size of this, right? And it will give you now the total amount of that. So I'm using it as a reduce as a way to train my brain, especially on the functional programming. So anytime that you need to use this to understand that anytime that you look at reduce, you say, oh, somebody's trying to combine data. That's all. That's all. Period. Right? Somebody's trying to combine data. Okay? And the way that they combine data is to say something like this. So you got an accumulator where you, of course, need to return this. Okay? And you need to return like this. Right? You need to return this. You need to return this. Right? The accumulator will be is the accumulator plus whatever you have on the current value pizza size here. So the current value pizza size, right, that it will give us now is a value. Okay, so what we're going to do is to go to all of these elements and check the size that has a price, and therefore going to now accumulate or count or combine is these values, and the initial value is 0. So far it makes a lot of sense of what we're doing, right? I prefer to start this as total to be descriptive about the story that I'm defining here. Okay, so every time you see a reduce is telling you this is a combination, okay, of data. This is a combination operation, right? I want to combine data here. Mm-hmm. And then we want to show is the total, of course. So this will be now a class name, which is card. And then we're gonna have here is the h2. Card. Another list and show all of the elements. Okay, because we're gonna render all of this here. Say card.map. Okay, we just say this is the item and the index. Okay, and then I want to is generate this HTML. No, in this case, it makes a lot of sense. So we're gonna use key in this card because none of the elements here are unique. However, if you are going to render an element of okay, if you're going to render an element that has an identifier, okay, use key, all right? But however, if you are generating a list of elements without any ID, for example, like this card, it makes a lot of sense to go with that. So we're gonna use now the index in our case for that, and the item will be now pizza. It's because I don't know what is the shape of this. And then span. Okay, class name equal size and item. Okay, item size. Item dot size. And if I want to save this, prettier is not working as expected. There you got it. You are right, Eslin. You are right, Eslin. So I can say, hey, I want to do this. Right. This one is type. So type and price dot pizza name pizza dot name, and here we're gonna show is the pizza dot price. I'm assuming that, and then I'm going to show now is the total here by saying, hey, do you have any class name? No? Okay, fine. Total of the internationalization price that we compute, which is format, about total, right? And now right? So because we don't have any form, we're using is this. Okay, so button on click you have is the event that we're gonna receive here, and therefore we're going to now submit this to that, right? So I don't know when we're going to submit because I don't know the API that we're going to do that. So we say fetch so we're going to say fetch to, if we take a look at the server.js, I think it's this one, so API order, right? So API order, I want to in this case send some data, and because I want to send data, here I'm going to say the method will be now a post. I need to tell the other computer, hey, this is the data, this is the format of this data that I'm going to send you, which is a content type, right? It is an application slash JSON, I think it is, but this is in lowercase. Okay, so the content type here that I want to send is that. Is an application JSON. So what are we doing here? We are going to so we are now is from the browser communicating to the network services, and it's going to pass now through the OC model, which is this standard, the open standard of interconnection. So TLDR is that no matter which architecture those computers have, you have MIPS or RISC, or MIPS or RISC or X, MIPS or RISC or x86, all right, or x8064. So no matter which architecture, no matter which computer architecture they have, all right, whether it is a MIPS, RISC, x86, x64, you name it, right? It's going to pass through this OC model. So now, by breaking this message that we're gonna send as the header, okay, we're gonna send some headers here. Oh, exactly. This is the header, bro. Let's go inside of the headers, right? Let's go inside of the headers, right? And I want to now the body will be is the card, right? But because I won't define is this here, because I won't define this logic here, I want to define is the logic is on the upper. I want to define is the logic is on the upper. On the upper component. Why is this? I'm gonna say check out. Right? Why is this? Good question. So this is part of the one-way data flow. So we're going to send now data from parent to child component, and this is all stuff known as props drilling. Get used to this, all right? But there also, for example, if you need to define some app level state data, all right? So you can have access through that via context or a Redux, right? Or any of this Redux family. Substand, and all the others that want to compete as the norm of Redux, right? So, but the point of this is that this happened is in this particular fashion, right? This is known as the props drilling or the parent to child relationship, right? So if you want to communicate to parent and child relationship, you do that by emitting events, right, to the parent from child to parent, but the data must go from parent to child. Mm-hmm. So it's in here where we are going to define is the checkout. So the checkout, which is now an async function here, that is going to have this that is going to have this, and here we are preparing everything that we need to do. All right, in the cart. So let's going to move this. We're going to move this. Mm-hmm. On the checkout. Exactly. He just wrapped everything here in an order page. Mm-hmm. He just wrapped everything here in an order page. Say class name. Say this order page, right? And then you have to move this right below. This one. There you got it. So, because this is already running, say, oh, oops, holy fuck. Did I mess something? Order page. Okay, and then I put the car just like this. So if we reload this, we're not be able to see anything, which is interesting. Which is interesting. What about now? Okay. Is rendering. That's interesting. It's rendering. Car. Okay, it's rendering, but okay. Car is not defined as export default car. You are correct. You are correct. All right. You are correct, and now you are showing that properly. So once I click here and I click on the add car. Add to car, it won't work because I haven't added the proper functionality to that. Oh, because we're handling is a logic on the submit. Exactly. So we're handling is a logic on the submit. Say this one. So add the car. Add the car. Okay, it's not adding that properly. The spy that we are sending down to the car. Perhaps the way how I'm setting the car is here is because it's set cart, not car. And now it worked. Ooh, then it crashed because it says current value, the pixel size is undefined. For example, it's gonna add this. It crashed because it say this one on total. Car GX line 11, because it say, oh, you think you're that's what happened. Now if I reload this and add the car, we're still getting the same error. We say current value dot pixel size. Perhaps it's because we named that properly, because it's sizes in plural. That's what it is. Alright, and now when we click here, add to the car, it will crash again. And line 21, with this, you say, hey, item size, car.map, item is undefined. It's because it is item and then index. Now you're gonna find that out, right? And once we add this, for example, large, we are able to add this. The same for this, and so on and so forth, right? So good. We're able to at least add these elements to that and wire them up. This is the reason why we actually put it in that, because we want to handle is the logic of loading and all that kind of stuff. We can add this too, but we can handle that here. So if we do this, right? If we do this, so anytime that we fetch data, it's going to update or it's going to call the car which is going to render the latest components in there, as well as this last state. So it's going to update or the component at that part, at that portion of the tree. In our case, this is what we want, so that'll be good. So for example, we can say, hey, set loading, so set loading to true, all right? And then I want to fetch data here using the method post and the headers to indicate now, hey, browser, I want you to have access to the network services that are provided by the OS, okay? And I need to tell you what is the type of data that you're going to send over. So this message that I'm going to send through the body, okay, and through the application layer, through the OCD model, these open system interconnection. So regardless the architecture of those computers, RISC, CISC, you name it, we were able to, by following this particular standard, interchange data. So you have now the application level, which is this one, right? That is going to communicate to the network services. And at the presentation layer, this is why we like to recap about this, because I find that out very valuable. CDN OC model here. Follow me along here in this journey. Follow me along. Follow me along. Follow me along. Follow me along. Here. Like this, okay. So what's the OC model? Is this? So at the application layer, you say is the human interaction computer, which is what I show you. All right. So the human computer interaction here is this one. All right. This is the human computer interaction, the application layer. Hey, browser from JavaScript, I want you to have access through the network services via fetch API, and this is the resource that I want to send data, and this is the options here via the method post. Following is the HTTP method. All right, and some of the headers to indicate, hey, this will be now the shape, the file extension, the format of this file, and followed by the body here. Right? So what does it mean that is once it passed through that, so from the application layer, that it allows to have access to the network services, and on the presentation it ensures that the data is in a usable format, and that is, hey, the application.json in our case, okay? Exactly. The application.json in our case, the presentation layer, and this is that ensure the proper that the data is in a usable format. And this is where encryption happens. And then you have now the season layer, which handles the ports and controlling the season, all right? And then you have now the transport layer that say, hey, let me now transmit this message from the body and split that into small chunks so then I can identify when I need to send that. What is the physical path I need to send that? Which is via the IP protocol or the network layer. And then on the data link layer, which is where the data frames happens, it say, hey, I have now the format that I'm going to send over the network. And then on the physical medium, which is the raw transmission happens. So this happens, all right? And this JSON that is transformed into a sequence of bytes on at the HTTP level. Okay, so for example, a good analogy here would be this. So I can ask Claw here. So when I send this message, so when I send so when I send this message, okay, what am I telling to my machine is to transform this JSON object into a sequence of bytes at the transport layer. It to transform this JSON object into a sequence of bytes at the transport layer, okay, and send that over the network, okay, send that over the network, so the computer, so the target computer can, okay, so I'm telling it to my machine is to encode this JSON object into a sequence of bytes at the transport layer and send over the network, so that the target computer, so I said over the network, okay, so that the target computer can receive this sequence of bytes, and via some internal methods, you're right, and via request.json, so that the target computer, the server, can receive this sequence of bytes and via because you have now the body parser. Okay, it's a middleware. Parse incoming request body in a middleware before you handlers, available under the request body. So this model provides the following parser: JSON body parser, raw body parser, text body parser, or URL encoding from body parser. So anytime you receive is a request, it's gonna pass through this. Exactly. So anytime you create an application JSON parser, URL encoder parser, okay, and post login gets URL encoded body. Okay, and anytime the server detect that, you can have access to the body, to that, exactly, through JSON parser or the URL encoder. Change of set types for parsers. Exactly, you can use like this. Parse various different custom JSON types. Parse some custom things into a buffer. Exactly. Body parser and JSON. Body parser raw and text. Okay. Alright. So the target computer server can receive this sequence of bytes and via body parser uh, library method. Okay, so the target computer server, in our case Node.js, can receive this sequence of bytes and via body parser library methods uh, decode that's decode into uh, a JSON. Decode into a JSON and make it accessible to work on the server. So the client side, when you execute the fetch code, the car object should first convert into a JSON using string. So JSON stringify. You need to convert into a JSON. JSON stringify. Your code needs this adjustment, as currently you are trying to send an object directly. Okay, I'm trying to send an object directly. JSON that stringify. So the car object should be converted to a JSON using JSON stringify car. Your code will need this adjustment, and currently you're showing to trying to send the object directly. The browser fetch API prepares an HTTP request with your specified method posts and headers. The content type headers tell the receiver's server that you are sending JSON as a metadata. The browser converts the JSON string into because the browser needs to convert that string. It makes sense because when you decode that, you need to there's several steps that's going on behind the scenes. So for example, when you do a get request via fetch, and then you try to decode that response, you need to run the JSON where it say, hey, I'm going to wait for this sequence of data to be I'm gonna wait for all of the chunks of data to be loaded, and then decode into a character, because it makes sense, and then decode that into a character, and then decode that into a character into a character format system. Okay, so UTF. Okay, and then decode that into a character is a standard used for electronic communications. Exactly. Code points with lower numeric values, which tend to occur more frequently, are encoded using fewer bytes. ASCII control character, ASCII translator. But again, how do they call this? Not sure what it is. Okay, the character set, the set character. Okay, so then, okay, so what am I saying? What am I doing here? Is to organize my idea, especially when you need to send data and to receive data, or into get data, or into post data. So for the get, so anytime that you use the fetch API, you say, hey, this is the resource that I want to get data using the API model, right? The RESTful architecture. That I want to say, once I notify the browser via fetch API that I want to fetch that data, I want to wait for that, and once that data is done, I reserve that and store that in a response. Then I want to now is transform that response, which is which represents the metadata of the so the response represents the metadata about the content, such as the headers, the status code, and the body content that is encoded. And because I want to decode that from a binary, because I want to decode that from a sequence of bytes into a character set via, for example, UTF, right? Or Unicode, UTF-8, right? Via JSON methods on the response, that's what it's going to do. It's going to say, hey, I want to now wait for all of these chunks of data to be, so I want to wait for all chunks of data to, I will wait for all of this data to arrive. Okay, so I will wait for all of this data to arrive. I will wait for all of these chunks of data to arrive from the server to the client, and then decode that sequence of binary, and decode that sequence, the entire sequence of bytes into a character set, UTF, for example, and then transform that into, or parse into a JSON. So this is from getting the data. However, when you want to send data or post data, so now you as the sender, you need to clarify what is the method, what are the options or the headers here, which is, hey, the data that I want to send is in this particular format as an application JSON, all right? And then because the data needs to be transformed into a text, because that's how you receive that data, and that's how now the fetch is going to encode that. So you need to pass the body as a string, and then the fetch is going to transform. The fetch is going to encode that by passing through all of the layer of the OC model into a sequence of bytes that are ready to be sent. The computer targets receive that if you have now a Node.js server established, or if you set up a Node.js server and you define now the body parser, so anytime that it receives an incoming request at that particular route, it's going to now parse that body, which is going to take all of this sequence of data. It's going to take all of this sequence of bytes, wait for all of them to be loaded, and then transform into a character set, UTF, and therefore parse that into a JSON object. That's pretty mind-bending, blowing stuff, bro. Holy fuck. Okay. These bytes are packaged into TCP/IP package at the transport layer. The package travels across the network to the target server. The server network stack reassembly this package, and the server-side Node.js, the server receives the complete request. When using Express.js, a common Node.js framework, Express.json middleware, which use body parser internally in newer Express version, intercept the request. It reads the content type header, all right, and see, oh, this is a JSON. So I know to parse the raw bytes and decode that into a UTF-8 byte back into a string, and then parse the JSON string back into a JavaScript object using the JSON.parser. So the parse object is then attached to the request body properly, making it accessible in your route handlers. Your explanation captured the essence of what's happening. Serialization data at one end, sending over the network as byte, and deserializing it at the other end so it can be used programmatically. The only correction need is that you should be using is this JSON stringified char as the body value in your fetch. So So when I send this message, and I want to make it very short, I don't want to do, I don't want to, oh, come on, man. Oh, for real? Okay. So, okay. So, So I want to describe what's happened here. So what's happened here, known as serialization, known as data serialization at one end. Data serialization at one end, network transport of byte and deserialization at the other end. So when we send data via fetch API, okay, we are telling to our browser, hey, I want you to communicate with the network services that live in the OS, okay, and live in the OS, and send this data, okay, and send this message as a string, exactly, and send this text message, okay, and send this text message, okay, and send this text message as a JSON, and send this text message as a JSON. Yeah, and send this text message as a JSON to the network by transforming at the transport layer the message into a sequence of bytes. Okay, the message into a sequence of bytes. Okay, at the transport layer the message into a sequence of bytes to the target computer. Okay, into a sequence of bytes to the target computer Node.js server. Okay, and send the message exactly, and transform transform at the transport layer the message into a sequence of bytes to the target computer endpoint. So when it receives that, transform the sequence. So when it receive that, transform the sequence of bytes into a UTF-8, into a character set, typically or usually UTF-8, and transform, or in so when it receive on receive. Okay, so when it receive it, so when receive, okay, so when receive, decode the sequence of bytes into a character set, usually a UTF, and then parse into a JSON via body parser library. Packetization, transmission. Except from in-memory objects to network byte and back to against objects. Okay, so I think this is quite important to describe here. So describing, or this is known as the serialization. So data flow serialization, serializations and deserializations. uh, Data flow serialization, there'll be network data flow serialization and deserialization. And is this one. Before, let's take a look at this. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Network data flow serialization and deserialization. But here what we're describing is as a story, bro. From in-memory objects to network bytes and back to objects again. Holy bro. Exactly. From in-memory objects transforming to network bytes and back to an object again in that computer. Holy, in a structured way. That is mind-bending stuff. I definitely must admit that. Mm-hmm. Jaque mate, capitalista. Yeah.
Well, what do we have here? Well, ladies, meet my friends and colleagues. This is Akibo, Godwin. This is Jasmine, Stacy. Shayori, Ome Birinye, Oshe Dareto, Torelo Melara. Aki Sheni Luyo. And this is Mia. Along Mio, Oboshe Dabi Igi Shano. Dabi Pe Kobado. Teben, Kankan, Tudalati. Sony Yoruba. Hey, I just thought of a brilliant idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm. Oh, because you need to transform that into a card. Okay. You need to transform that array into a card and say card that card. Then it'll do the things. Mm-hmm. So let's go into now a way for this in our case. And once that is done, we want us to set the card state to empty and set loading to false. Pretty much. This is it. And that's supposed to work. Check out. Is through sub function. So we can take a look at now at that. I want to do and the Hawaiian large, and the spinac small, and then you send that, and the server now get that. Exactly, content type application JSON, char set UDF. All right, so so in our case, right, now that we get this, we then can safely say this one. Okay. Git status. And on the order. Handling user input. It will clean up. Mm. Mm-hmm. So, um, yep, that's right. And let's go now to use context. So in our case, you can check out our repo. And git push to React hook. That's right. There you got it. Exactly. Send this message, send this text message as a JSON to the network. So over the network. By transforming at the transport layer the message into a sequence of bytes to the target computer. To the target computer endpoint. So when receive, decode the sequence into a byte, decode the sequence of byte into a character set, usually UTF, and parse into a JSON via body, so you can have access via route handlers. That's the entire reason of doing this, right? To those arguments. Let's see we should arguing about that. The reality, bro. Reality. Reality hit. Yeah, you're going to define is now a particular state at the top level, pass down. Mm-hmm. Exactly. If you're doing now, if you're exporting several of them, multiple different contexts, it's important to do the important name. Context. An array in our case. It's a function. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. So the idea here is to define it as shape of the function to the TypeScript and say, hey, okay, this is it. This is the signature, function signature. Mm. Mm-hmm. To the initial state. And here we're gonna say is the car context, and to provide now that context. The provider. Mm-hmm. This valley. The one. The most closest parents to it. Because you can now override some states of that. Interrupt the provider. Interrupt that. Deshazte de eso. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Use context and the hook. Whatever you can find above it, that will be passing here. This is string little. That's what you have, for example, like type. Mm. So, okay. That'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.